Welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Guilty, where we look at games, movies, or whatever else strikes our fancy, then decide in our opinion whether it's good, bad, or a guilty pleasure. We're your hosts, Theron.
And Kit.
Following up with what had been stated prior when we reviewed Kingdom Hearts 1, we were going to follow through reviewing its sequel.
Kingdom Hearts 2.
Kingdom Hearts 2 is an action RPG developed by Square Enix, originally released solely on the PlayStation 2 in December of 2005 in Japan, March of 2006 in America, and September of 2006 for everywhere else, and has since been released on multiple consoles through a plethora of re-releases, usually with the addition of other games from the series to help sweeten the incentive to rebuy a game most people at this point have rebought about 3 different times at minimum. Development plans for Kingdom Hearts 2 began around the completion of Kingdom Hearts Final Mix, but didn't have much push until 2003 due to a desire to have Mickey Mouse play a more prevalent role, which is why Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories was developed. Thus why this is Kingdom Hearts 2, and why nobody cares about Chain of Memories.
I stated in the Kingdom Hearts 1 review I got introduced into the series in the way of seeing info of it in the Game Informer magazine, and then played the first, and about half of Chain of Memories before Kingdom Hearts 2 was released, and I found it to be a major improvement over the prior games in the series.
After Kingdom Hearts 1, interest in the series was pretty high, but at the time that Chain of Memories came out, we didn't exactly have the money to spend on a handheld, so trying that was shelved. Though interest in the series came back quickly upon hearing that Kingdom Hearts 2 was on its way, and it ended up as a birthday present the year it was released, which hit the wallet pretty hard at the time.
Graphically, the game is more or less the same as Kingdom Hearts. The only difference, I think, is the areas pop a bit more and look more impressive. Overall, basically, if you liked how 1 looked, you will enjoy 2.
Visually, the game doesn't improve much over the first game. Is that bad? Not completely. It has the benefits of the first game. It's colorful, the visuals haven't dated much due to their cartoony design, but at the same time there isn't any real improvement from the first game. It looks nice, but there isn't much more to say. Commencing on to the story, with Kingdom Hearts 2, we start out playing a new character on the scene, Roxas, whose importance to the story will be thrown out the window until later games in the series because he's basically unimportant throughout this game. He is more here solely to give a tutorial while leading into the actual game where Sora wakes from a year-long coma brought on by the events of Chain of Memories. Simply put, his memories were removed and are now back in place, thus why he is awakening. Once Sora is awake, his first priority isn't to investigate the weird scenario in which he finds himself in, question how wearing the same clothes for an entire year hasn't led to chafing, rot, a horrid stench, or anything else of the like, but instead to leave the abandoned mansion with a secret lab in the basement to... I don't think it is actually explained what their game plan was after this, but it is interrupted by the king, also known as Mickey Mouse, whom sends Sora and company to see Yensid about getting prepped to go on another adventure because their attempts to stop Heartless in the first game turned out to have done nothing more than bought them time. From this, Yensid explains that Heartless are only half the problem, and now they must contend with an enemy known as Nobodies, who turn out to be the byproduct of the separation process which makes Heartless. And explaining they are being controlled by a group known as Organization 13, a group of 13 nobodies with enough power to transcend part of the nobody process to make themselves look and act more human than the standard nobody. On the journey, Sora and the group uncover a convoluted plot in which the organization are attempting to get into Kingdom Hearts, not by the same trickery as the first plan Ansem had, but instead through a Plan B method in which they collect so many hearts from the Heartless that Kingdom Hearts opens for them. Somehow.
You see, what I've done, Adam, is built a completely self-sustaining...
Darkness.
See? You look fantastic. Doing nothing more than what
Heartless.
was designed to do. I make money from
Heartless.
all my fake content in order to pay
Heartless.
to promote my fake stories.
To talk about the story, well, it's longer. It's also more interesting, but while more interesting and a longer story, they didn't really improve much beyond that. In fact, I would say most of its problems were multiplied. In the first review, I mentioned some odd ways the rules were being ignored. Well, in this one we have rules being ignored, some being acknowledged, and some of them being acknowledged only to be ignored when it is convenient for the plot. A great place to start would actually be a pretty notable plot hole, which appears rather soon story-wise. On Olympus, you are tasked with talking with Hades to give Hercules a break. But then it turns out when you get there, the only option you take part in is promptly attempting to attack Hades because apparently the Keyblade Master's only way to talk things out comes in the form of smashing faces in. When this variant of talking known as violence fails to work, to probably nobody's surprise, it is revealed that heroes, such as Sora and his group, have no power in the Underworld. Well, ignoring the fact that Hades just revived a hero to fight Herc, we earlier ran into a black-robed fellow whose name hasn't been revealed yet, named Demix. This is an Organization 13 member, a bad guy. He is promptly seen, running for his life from the horrors of this place. He should have power. Well, he ran because he needed a special item which Sora needs so that he can use his power in the underworld. Demix stole this item and ran into the underworld with it the second go-around, forcing Sora to go in after him. Now, all this talking was to give context, because there isn't a reason for Demix to steal the item unless he himself needs it here. The organization needs Sora to keep killing Heartless, which I will get to in a moment, and before Demix stole the item, Herc was getting it for Sora, meaning if it was intended to help, it was directly hindering their plans in every way. Demix couldn't have stole it to stop Sora because the organization specifically needs Sora for their plans, and so hindering him only hurts them. This leaves a limitation that the only reason Demix stole the item is because he needed it himself because his powers didn't work in the underworld, which Hades specifically states,
That's right! See, that's the thing. In the underworld, heroes are zeros. It comes with the territory.
This would mean if Demix needed it, he would not count as a villain, even though the organization are very unambiguously shown to be the villains for Kingdom Hearts 2. Moving to that bit I mentioned about Sora being important for the organization's plans, Organization 13 needs Sora to kill Heartless because upon killing Heartless with his Keyblade, the hearts released help further the plan Organization 13 have for opening Kingdom Hearts, and so every Heartless Sora kills helps the enemy. Now this all sounds well and good and has moral implication, which they drop moments after this reveal, by the way. This plot point, though, as quick as the moral implications were dropped, still had a nice twist, until a little more observation goes into it. When Sora kills a Heartless, a heart floats into the sky. This is shown to be important for this, and thus is in fact a plot point. Problem arises. These hearts pop out no matter who kills the Heartless, except for, maybe, nobody's. These hearts that only Sora can release by killing Heartless with his Keyblade can be seen throughout the game being released whenever Heartless are killed by Squall, Yuffie, Cloud, Sephiroth, pretty much everyone except maybe the main villains, Organization 13. I accepted it at first that it was a thing that happened because Sora was around, but it can be seen in scenes where Sora is nowhere to be found. This kind of renders Sora's importance moot. This isn't at all the only plot hole, but to cut this short, I will let Wacko and Dot summarize.
And this weak and idle theme. No more yielding, but a dream. There is a hole in the plot you could drive a truck through.
The story is still rushed in most places, much like the first game. I at first thought I'd shrug this off, but after taking my time through them, I realized this was pretty poorly set up. The game has more worlds and at the same time more trips to those worlds. While they can be somewhat repetitive due to the fact that most of the story points are like playing a game of Mad Lib where certain words are simply replaced, it has a bigger issue. Some worlds rush the player through the main movie in a single part, whereas Sora might need to visit that world again, or maybe even 2 or 3 or even 4 more times. When the player goes to the Pirates of the Caribbean world for the first time, they beat Barbossa and the Cursed Crew in the first part. The next part has little to do with the world and instead just seems tacked on. The main story point was rushed through, yet they still make the player come back here when they could have gave more to do for the world before the climactic end battle fighting Barbossa. In the first game, I criticized this, but I admit it could have simply been a limit based on time they had to work on it. In this case, though, they do this on most worlds, with very few of them running through the stories they start over more than one part. Go to the Lion King world, kill Scar in the first act. Pirates of the Caribbean, kill Barbossa first act. Rinse and repeat on most of the worlds you come to. Ironically, the only exception I think that I can think of is Ariel's world, where it takes 4 parts before you get to the villain you killed in the first fucking game. Apart from the rushed storyline, there is some improvement to Sora himself. The first review, I stated that Sora was more whatever the story needed him to be. Each world, his personality would change to allow the story. Well, they improved that, some. Sora has a personality now. His personality is overly stupid and heroic. I don't have much problems with this. They go overboard at times, like really overboard. And to compensate, they made Goofy the smart one. Did these guys watch Disney? In fact, did these guys play their own games? I know Goofy isn't a moron, but he was never treated as a highly intelligent individual in which this game will just give him sudden intelligence spikes to explain the plot, while leaving the mage of all people baffled by everything when their power is connected to their intellect. I'm going to cut this short because this is getting a bit long, and if I were to list even the basic plot holes and not even delving into the more obscure ones, it reaches a point of absurd which would probably run this section alone for a good hour, and nobody wants to put up with me for an hour.
When I first played Kingdom Hearts 2 back when it was first released, I remember watching the opening scene and saying, "Who's that? What's happening? Why is Sora in a glass ball? And who's that guy I'm now playing?" As if you didn't play Chain of Memories all the way through, you and quite a lot of players were left in the dark. The game does a little info on what happened between the games, but I kinda felt like the opening part was handled really sloppily if you didn't play the side game. Besides that though, I've always enjoyed the story in Kingdom Hearts 2 as it always felt bigger and had a lot more going on with it, as each world is marginally bigger and basically telling the story of the movie from the start to the end, but in a more Cliff Notes manner. The first visit handling the movie, and then the second visit where usually Organization 13 shows up on the world to cause their own bit of chaos. A really good or bad example of the Cliff Notes story approach depends on how you feel on it is the Pirates of the Caribbean world. As the first visit, you land when
Captain Jack Sparrow, if you please.
Captain Jack Sparrow and Will are getting a boat to chase after the pirates who have taken Elizabeth, and then basically you arrive at the island. They grab her in a few seconds, book it out of there, get captured, return back, and beat Barbossa. Sure, they do some side stuff like Will saying who he is, but they kinda skip over a lot of the movie just to have a new property rush to be in time for the game. Then the second visit is of a member from Organization 13 grabbing the cursed coins for some reason. Yeah, this is another plot hole in it. Organization 13 needs hearts, correct? Yet they want the cursed coins to make the big boss heartless, immortal, and invincible? There's a lot of stuff like that if you look at the game. It kinda makes the game feel like the stories were made separately from each other and then pushed together in hopes that they would fit, which of course sometimes they do, but other times they don't. Future games do this as well in the series, but we're focusing on Kingdom Hearts 2 at the moment. There's one part though that has me confused. It's the whole Ursula thing again. In Hearts 1 you kill her in a boss fight, correct? Yet she's back once again in this, not even mentioning the beatdown or even any events from before as you kill her once again. They couldn't have just did the sequel instead and had you fight Ursula's crazy sister?
Ursula's crazy sister!
On top of this, Ariel works with Ursula even though the events of Kingdom Hearts 1 makes it obvious she would know she's bad because Ursula tried to overthrow her dad in that game as well. As said before, they brought in a new group of bad guys beside the Heartless called Organization 13, and they lead a new group called the Nobodies. Though because of Chain of Memories, quite a few have been taken out, so it's more Organization 7 after the events of that game. I always thought they were a neat addition to the enemies, as they were shown to be a bigger threat by always appearing to cause trouble, unlike Ansem did in the first game. Plus, each of the members has their own special thing about them, from their weapon to just how they acted, so that adds even more to them. Though that doesn't mean they're not without flaws as baddies, as they keep trying to either kill Sora or put him in more danger when they need him to collect hearts, which there's A, no guarantee if Sora dies they will get Roxas back, and B, what if he does get hurt so bad he wasn't able to swing the Keyblade and such. Their plan would have failed if not for some major luck on Sora's part. Can we also bring up the Keyblade in this game? As we as the players are told it can only free hearts from Heartless, though we see hearts flying off when others kill Heartless. It makes no sense. Anyways, I would like to say I do like Sora in this game a lot more than how he was in 1, as he feels more like his own person instead of what the plot needs him to be on the world. Though a bit headstrong like on Hercules' world, where he needs to talk to Hades on behalf of Meg about giving Hercules a break, right in front of Hercules when it was supposed to be kept silent from him. As for Donald and Goofy, they seem more or less like their normal selves, but Goofy does feel a bit smarter for the group than what I know for him. Every aspect for gameplay I feel has been improved in so many ways. Movement now has been improved, but not only movement, but the areas you move in. There's no more bottomless pits or jumps you need to be right on the edge to get over. Even if there was, there's now invisible walls so you're not falling off the area over and over. Also, the new form Sora gets access to when he first wakes helps greatly. The dry forms not only allow even more fluid movement when you level them up, they allow Sora to use abilities like high jump and glide from the previous games too. Also a new way to fight Heartless and Nobodies. There's 6 dry form Sora gains to use over the story, and each not only adds new moves, but a Keyblade or 3 to the mix to really bring on the pain and combos. At the temporary loss of Goofy or Donald in your party for the time it's active. There's the Power form, which gives Sora 2 Keyblades and deals out more damage in combos, Wisdom form, which increases spell power, Master form for air combat, and his final form, which mixes the three together, basically. There's also an anti-form which can happen where Sora becomes what looks like a Heartless, and while in it, he's a glass cannon and can't change back until the form ends, unlike the rest. If you have the final mix of the game, you also gain access to Limit form, which basically allows you to use Sora's old moves from the previous game, which I found kinda useless compared to the rest of the drive forms you have to work with. Though often they like to lock the drive forms, which makes them pretty useless beyond taking on enemies you can already kill. So with all those and the upgrades they give you, the combat, as you can tell, feels a lot more open in this game, even if the magic doesn't. One gripe I have is how the spells were changed from the original, like fire no longer being a projectile but a ring around you, or heal taking all your mana in a fight. Though it doesn't quite matter, as the fighting also has been dumbed down quite a bit, minus some fights like Organization 13 fights or just made more gimmicky like the Pirate's second fight. This would also be a good time to bring up a new mechanic they added, being the action command. If you played the first, you will remember always having to clear out an area before opening a chest or to do something else. Well, they now made it so you can keep the action flowing with the triangle button. It not only works for chests, but if you need to perform a special move, to just talking with someone. Lastly, there's summons once again. They're shit. On to the gummy ships! The gummy ship areas also got improved in the game, where now instead of just coasting along, it's high octane flying through waves of ships with actually needing to dodge and fire to survive the flight through to the next world, and gives plenty of want to replay to S rank. The ship crafting menu also looks and feels a lot easier to navigate with in order to build the best ship you can think of. Even if you don't want to deal with building a new ship, each mission gives you a new, already built ship to use next time for the paths. Though I will say for one thing, their AI is a bit bad. If you make a square as big as you can with an empty center, place cannons around the edges and a few thrusters, you will hardly get hit as all will aim for inside the square and not the square's edges. It's useful for reaching the final level of the final flight in the game. Finally, for gameplay is all the stuff they added for the final mix version. There's a new area that opens up in Hollow Bastion that makes you use the full power of your fully leveled drive forms to navigate a maze, which leads to a special room. In this room you can fight not only harder copies of the Organization 13 members in the game, but also the ones who were killed in Chain of Memories, as long as you beat them first in these specially floating books found in a few worlds which allow you to fight them as they were originally. I really enjoyed testing my skills fighting them, but they can be extremely cheap. There's also the Organization 13 mushrooms that were added. Like in Kingdom Hearts, you had to beat them in different ways with magic to make them drop items for item crafting, but unlike in 1, these have you do different challenges. Like not getting hit by them, taking out the most you can, and finding the right one. Finally, there's Lingering Will. After you have beaten Xemnas in the game and started back up, you can travel to Disney Castle to fight him, but watch out, he is extremely hard. Basically, though, that's what a lot of the Final Mix parts added to this, as they're just there to test your skills and or infuriate you as in-game content.
The game has some good points and bad points, just like the first go-round. Though I'd say more good than bad this time. Movement is a lot better, combat is more fluid from the start, and as the player goes along, they will get even more tricks and powers to make combat even more fluid. Though that isn't perfect, as can be guessed. Where I stated prior, Kingdom Hearts 1 had a difficulty to it where the game would be more difficult or less difficult based on how impatient you were. That isn't the case in this one. At points, I was just running past enemies trying to get off-world, and not only was I over-leveled by the next world, but I was easily beating back even the bosses with pretty much no issues at all. This lack of difficulty isn't just in a few places. It also doesn't seem to be a problem with the combat itself being much more fluid this time around either. Heartless seem to do less damage. Bosses don't take chunks of life, but instead half the time only take slivers if they even hit you. And of course, we also have Donald. Donald was always dead in Kingdom Hearts 1. In Kingdom Hearts 2, Donald holds what seems to be a cheat spell or something. Comet! Use it, and pretty much any fight you're in, you're invincible while it runs. Donald does damage while you are, you can attack during it, and it has a finisher which, when used right, can deal out massive damage. There's very few things which become a hassle when Donald uses this, the exceptions to this being the reaction commands which are unusable during this attack. And when I say this game is easier, I don't simply mean the difficulty gradually increases. It's the entire game with only 2 exceptions. The first and foremost being the fight against Sephiroth, and the second being a mandatory fight against an Organization 13 member called Demyx. One of Organization 13, and possibly one of the most insulting moments in this game, as instead of fighting you and having you lose because you suck, his fight involves forcing you into time segments which, if the timer runs out, you instantly fail the entire fight. Sounds simple enough, I know. The problem is that it has luck as a factor of success. Within his fight, he will suddenly get this timer out and you have to kill off some water notes he summons. Why? The game never says. They just slap the timer on and you better not fuck up. The first one isn't too bad, 40 or so seconds to kill 50 of the water clones, easy enough. The second one gives you 10 seconds to kill 10. It sounds easy, I know it does. The problem is that the method for wiping them out is usually to use a context action which will grab and use one of the clones as a weapon to kill the others. This usually does them in pretty quick, at least it's supposed to. The game doesn't summon the clones the same every time, and so when the player grabs one of the clones to use them, they might not actually get all the clones killed in time due to the summoned clones not being grouped together close enough. And if the player has to swing that note even one too many times, they are likely to fail the timer. Some might be curious why it's likely. Well, because the clone that the player picks up counts as alive until thrown away and given a death animation. This means the timer counts down. If the player holds onto the clone too long while the fight is going on, then they will lose even if they killed all the clones off. I was meticulous and paid attention to the timer this time just to see how long of a window of failure there was. I got lucky with the clone spawns after a few tries and got them in the perfect spots to wipe them out the moment they spawned in. I threw the clone I used. I nearly failed it even when I succeeded because of how long it takes to finish up. It is a serious souring point for the game because points before then are basically breezes. Points after it are basically breezes. Just this one point is there like a toll booth saying the player must complete this random, arbitrary, and forced event to proceed. That is part of the biggest problem with it as well. There is no explanation for it. He summons clones. The player gets a timer. If the timer runs out, the player loses. There isn't any incentive beyond that. No talk about him getting extra strong, no talk of him getting away, nothing. Just do this or fail because screw you, we don't need a reason. It is this specific moment as well. Due to this, I decided to test, starting a few worlds after the fact with my level quite below the recommended level suggestion and effortlessly took the worlds. Not only that, but attempts at such things as timed events usually involved having well beyond the necessary amount of time. This specific fight against Demix is the only place where this seems to be an issue, and it very much comes off as a forced-in curveball to make the game seem tough, when in actuality it just ends up being overly annoying. To turn away from that glaring spot on an otherwise enjoyable, albeit rather easy combat experience, we have the platforming and gummy segments. Platforming of which I would say has been improved, what little there is of it. I can't say this is a change I hate. The platforming was just one of the most bittering parts of Kingdom Hearts 1. In this one though, platforming is more or less just used as a means to get to a couple secrets and otherwise is uninvolved in the rest of the game. Gummy ships though, gummy ships make quite the return, and in a much better and refined state. The awkward angle of the camera? Gone. No longer are we confused as to where our shots are going. Well, for the most part, but I'll get to that. The gummy segments look to have been completely reworked into segments that are actually pretty fun now. The ship fires where the camera is looking, and to determine where on the screen it fires, the player now moves the ship and it fires straight ahead. It might sound less intuitive than the previous iteration, but in fact it works out more often than not. The camera will now turn based on where the enemies are attacking the player from, giving the player new angles to attack enemies at, and the scenery inside the gummy segments make it worth checking out, including but not limited to many Heartless in the areas, usually fitting the themes presented. On a stone roadway, the player will encounter a Heartless shaped like a giant wheel. When flying through some plains, the player will encounter giant Heartless like they're grazing in the fields, etc. The misunderstanding of where the guns shoot is more of a nitpick in this case, but worth noting. Some weapons will change where the guns fire, same as the first game, and the game really doesn't warn the player ahead of time. A 2-barrel gun is said to shoot 2 at once, not that the shots that prior were right ahead are suddenly going to shoot in a V out the front of the ship. Discovering that can be a bit annoying, but for the most part gummy ship segments are nice, relaxing, and enjoyable. All in all, a good boost from the originals. All in all, the game is still pretty fun if way too easy through most of the base game, with exceptions to this role primarily seeming to come from the fact they're outright curveballs more than actual difficulty. Characters for the most part are enjoyable and the tone works well. Donald for once isn't dead for 90% of the game, and at certain points kind of overpowered. The story improved in places, but then seemed to get tangled and weaved even more into a cluster of unrecognizable messes, which I'm totally sure wasn't the reason multiple other games have been released conveniently going over some of the similar information as though they're solely to explain away holes in the story. I find the game good, even if it has some pretty noticeable flaws. Most of its flaws are mild in comparison to the good points.
This game is still my favorite for the Kingdom Hearts series because of just how much they expanded on the story and gameplay. While, sure, the game does have its problems, I still play this game the most out of all the series, so much that I see myself replaying this long after Kingdom Hearts 3 finally shows up. So I would say it's good.
Cypher seems odd to me. Oh no.